When the Great War ended in 1918, this man sat down to write his eyewitness account of the events he'd seen and taken part in for the last 5 years. He was well qualified to do so, and he had an amazing story to tell.
It was at Ypres, where I had to lead my men across a swamp towards a forward trench. As we moved forward, a German aeroplane suddenly appeared. It swooped down over our heads and machine gunned us. I flopped down, hoping the earth might open and swallow us up. But it was then that I discovered that I'd flopped on the partly buried body of a man who'd evidently been lying in the sun for some time. The trenches were now so full of dead bodies that it was impossible to move without treading on them. The silence was oppressive. I was approached by a young signaller. He said he was the only man from the battalion headquarters who was still alive. "Have I your permission to retire, sir?" he asked, rather formally. "Well, there doesn't seem to be much to stay here for, does there?" I replied. As I hurried along, the shelling started again, and I hoped I'd continue to be lucky.
When he wrote those words, he put away his manuscript in an old cabin trunk and never mentioned it again. It stayed there for 91 years. Like many men of his generations, in his later years, he never discussed the war, even to me, and he was my father. Last year I decided it was time to clear out my garage, and it was then that I came across the trunk. It was full of papers, and the manuscript was still there, just as it had been left. A first-hand eyewitness account, written not by a historian or a journalist, but by a remarkable man who was actually there.